The year was 1884, and the high desert of the Arizona-New Mexico territory was baking under a sun that offered no mercy. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, bleaching the sky to a pale, angry white. Dust, fine as flour, coated everything. It settled in the lungs, in the creases of the eyes, and on the cracked lips of the land itself. This was the edge of the great desert, a place of stark beauty and brutal truths. The most brutal truth of that season was the drought. It had held the land in its fist for months, tightening its grip until the rivers shrank to muddy trickles and the creeks turned to dry, stony scars. At the heart of this suffering lay Tsai Canyon, a name that meant rock in the Dine language. Through Tsai, a sacred stream was meant to flow, the Diantu, the holy water that gave life. But the holy water was being choked. From a high ledge, hidden by juniper and shadow, Ashki Yazi watched. He was a man in his middle 30s, built with the lean, hard strength of the high mesas. His black hair was tied back, his face set in lines that spoke of vigilance rather than peace. He had been a scout for the cavalry, a man who had worn the blue coat and taken the soldier's coin, until the day it cost him his brother. The brass buttons of that uniform still gleamed in his nightmares. Now he was back, stripped of that blue, wearing only the clothes of his people. He was back to protect what remained. His gaze was fixed on the mouth of the canyon below. The sacred stream was barely a whisper, and he knew why. He watched the flash of axes, the glint of sunlight on metal tools. Silas Crowell's men. Silas Crowell was a man in his 40s, a rancher who had found a new, blacker greed in mining. He was building a dam, an ugly, raw timber scar across the canyon, stealing the Diantu to feed his thirsty mine operations upstream. He was building it without law, without permission, and without a shred of concern for the Dine people downstream whose sheep and children were beginning to thirst. Ashki's hand tightened on the smooth wood of the rifle resting across his knees. The guilt for his brother, Ki Yaz, was a constant companion, a stone in his gut. Ki Yaz had died in an ambush, one Ashki should have foreseen. He had trusted the cavalry officers, trusted their maps, and his trust had gotten his brother killed. He would not make that mistake again. He would not trust the white man's law, and he would not let Crowell steal the last lifeblood of his people. Below, he saw Crowell himself, a thick figure on a tall horse, directing the work. Crowell's voice, a harsh bark, carried faintly on the hot, dry air. He wanted the wall higher, the supports thicker. He was preparing to hold all the water, to own it. Miles away, the town of Dry Mercy wilted in the same heat. The town had chosen its name as a prayer, but the prayer had gone unanswered. Dry Mercy was a place of steepled roofs and rigid morals. The spiritual and social barometer of the town was held firmly in the hands of Preacher Caleb and his wife. From his pulpit, Preacher Caleb spoke of divine judgment and the wages of sin, his eyes often drifting toward the dusty hills where the heathens lived. His wife, a woman of sharp glances and sharper whispers, enforced that judgment in the general store and the sewing circle. In Dry Mercy, suspicion was a currency, and the Dine were deeply mistrusted. They were the outsiders, the red folk, blamed for the drought, for the poor hunting, for the general malaise of the thirsty land. Into this stifling atmosphere had walked Eleanor Hart. She was 28 years old, a woman with hair the color of new copper and eyes that had seen too much. She was a physician. Though many in Dry Mercy were slow to use the title for a woman, she was skilled with sutures, her hands steady as she closed wounds that would have festered under a man's clumsier care. She was an herbalist, her bags filled with willow bark for fevers, yarrow for bleeding, and echinacea for infections. She had come from Boston, fleeing a life she had not chosen. She had fled a dark drawing room, a domineering fiancé, and the expectation that she would be a possession, not a person. The faint, pale scar on her wrist, hidden by her cuff, was a permanent reminder of that life. She had come west to practice her trade, to be free, to breathe air that was not thick with judgment. She had found, in dry mercy, that judgment merely changed its accent. The Dine people understood the world through a different lens. They saw the sacred in the land, in the 4 great mountains that bounded their world, in the precise, healing patterns of sand paintings, in the low, resonant prayers of the healing songs. Theirs was a world where water was not a commodity to be damned and sold, but a relative, a living spirit. This belief was the foundation of the conflict that was about to boil over. The drought was not just an inconvenience, it was a disaster. Crowell's Dam had turned the lower stream into a series of stagnant, foul pools. Cattle, their ribs sharp under their hides, collapsed at the banks, their lowing a thin, desperate sound. And with the bad water came the sickness. Dysentery swept through the town and the camps. It moved quickly, especially among the children, wringing life from their small bodies. This was where Eleanor Hart, known to most as Nell, had made her mark. When the blacksmith's son had been seized by the bloody flux, and preacher Caleb had prayed for deliverance, Nell had arrived with her bag. She had boiled water, forced willow bark tea and a chalky mixture down the boy's throat, and sat with him for 2 days, cooling his brow and cleaning him with her own hands. The boy had lived. She had saved 2 other children in the town that same week. This earned her a measure of solid, if grudging, respect. She was useful, but the whispers started when she was seen riding her mule out toward the Dine camps, her bag just as ready. "Wasting good medicine," Preacher Caleb's wife had remarked at the mercantile. "Charity begins at home." Nell had simply looked at her green eyes clear and cold. Sickness does not care what home it visits. She had helped the red folk, and in the moral ledger of dry mercy, that put a question mark next to her name. On the hottest afternoon of that long, hot week, the threads of these lives began to draw together. Ashki was at his post on the ridge. He had not moved for hours, a part of the rock, watching the theft of his people's water. The sun beat on his shoulders. The air wavered over the canyon floor. Down at the dam site, the work had slowed. The men were tired, their movements sluggish. Crowell was gone, having ridden back to town for shade and whiskey. A shout cut the air. It was not a shout of anger, but of alarm. One of the workers, a young man pale with sun sickness, had staggered, dropped his hammer, and pitched forward into the dust. He did not move. The other men gathered around, useless, shuffling their feet. Ashki watched, his face impassive. This was the white man's problem. Then he saw a new figure approaching, a lone rider on a weary mule, coming not from the town but along the dry creek bed. It was the woman with the copper hair. Nell had been searching for a patch of desert sage she used for poultices and had seen the cluster of idle men. She guided her mule closer, saw the man on the ground, and slid from its back before it had even stopped. She pushed through the staring men, her medical bag thumping against her hip. "Get him in the shade," she ordered, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through their lethargic confusion. Now. They fumbled, lifting the man and carrying him to the meager shadow of a cottonwood. Nell was already on her knees beside him. She ripped open his shirt, her hands feeling for the pace of his heart. She uncorked her canteen and soaked her handkerchief, pressing it to his forehead and the back of his neck. "He is burning," she said, to no one in particular. She pulled a small, dark bottle from her bag and forced a few drops of a tincture between the man's cracked lips. From his ridge, Ashki watched. He had seen her in town, a flash of bright hair in the dust. He had heard the talk, the medicine woman. He watched her work. She was not afraid. She knelt in the dirt, her skirt soiled, her hands gentle but firm. She gave orders, and the rough men at the dam obeyed her. She commanded the space around her. Nell worked, her focus entirely on the man. But she felt something, a prickling on her skin that was not the heat. She had felt it before, the weight of being watched. She finished her immediate task, Satisfied, the man's breathing was easier. She looked up, scanning the dusty, sun-blasted faces of the workers. It was not them. Her gaze lifted, drawn by an instinct she could not name, up to the high, silent ridges of Sai Canyon. He was almost invisible, a shape of shadow and rock. But she saw him, a man, standing utterly still, watching her, a dying warrior. Their eyes met across the vast, hot expanse. 100 yards of shimmering heat and stolen water separated them. Ashki did not move. He saw a woman of baffling courage, a white woman kneeling to save a man who was, in that moment, his enemy. Nell held his gaze. She saw no welcome in his eyes, but she saw no hatred either. She saw in stillness a deep and unreadable presence that seemed as old as the canyon itself. The look held for a long moment, a silent question passing between the ridge and the dust. Then one of the workers shuffled, blocking her view, and the connection was broken. 2 nights later, the sky broke. It was not the gentle, soaking rain the land prayed for. It was a violent, sudden cloudburst, an angry fist of a storm that lasted less than an hour but unleashed a season's worth of fury. Thunder cracked directly overhead, and the moon, which had been full and bright, was swallowed by a rush of black clouds. The rain fell in sheets, turning the dry arroyos into churning, muddy torrents. It was too much, too fast. The water had no time to soak. It simply ran. And it ran straight into Silas Crowell's half-finished dam. The structure, built with greed and haste, had never been meant to hold back a true flood. It was a temporary barrier, designed to pool the stream's dwindling flow. Under the sudden, immense pressure of the flash flood, the raw timber groaned. A central support, its footing shallow in the sandy soil, gave way first. With a sound like a cannon shot, the dam burst apart. A wall of water, thick with mud, uprooted trees, and the splintered remains of the dam, roared down Sai Canyon. It struck the small dine encampment in the lower valley just before dawn. The camp was a quiet place of hogans and a few lean-tos, home to 3 families who tended the last of the sheep. They had no warning. The flood wave hit them in their sleep. It was a scene of chaos. The water tore through the camp, ripping away blankets, scattering cooking pots, and collapsing a small hogan. People scrambled in the darkness, parents shouting for children, the sound of the water mixing with the cries of terror. By sunrise, the water had receded, leaving behind a field of stinking gray mud and utter devastation. The sheep were gone, scattered or drowned. 1 hogan was destroyed. A woman had a broken arm, and several people had cuts and bruises. The worst, however, was a small child who had been pulled from a tangle of debris, his breathing shallow, his face pale. News traveled faster than the floodwaters. By mid-morning, a different kind of storm was brewing in Dry Mercy. The story, as it was told in the saloon and the general store, was not of a natural disaster. It was of sabotage. "Them Navajos," a man spat into a cuspidor. "Busted the dam. Knew it. Knew they would." "An act of aggression," Preacher Caleb declared from the steps of his church, his voice carrying in the suddenly still, humid air. "An assault on property in progress." Silas Crowell, his face a mask of purple rage, needed no more encouragement. The dam had cost him time and money. Now, it was splinters. He gathered his hired guards, 4 men with rifles and cold eyes, and rode out of town. He was not heading to the dam site. He was heading to the main dine village. Nell had heard the roar of the water from her small rented cabin. She had spent the morning checking on her patients in town, her heart sinking as she heard the rumors. The talk was ugly, and it was escalating, fearing the sickness would return with the muddied water. She packed her bag with extra bandages and laudanum and rode her mule toward the dine camps to see what help was needed. She arrived at the main village just as Crowell and his men did. They rode in not as neighbors, but as an occupying force, fanning out in a line. their rifles held across their saddles. The villagers, mostly women and elders, came out of their hogans, their faces tight with fear and anger. "Where is he?" Crowell bellowed, his horse dancing nervously. "Where is that scout? Where is Ashki Yazi?" Ashki emerged from the largest hogan. He was not wearing his rifle. He walked steadily, his hands empty and at his sides, and stood before Crowell's horse. "You have business with me." "Crowell?" Ashki's voice was low, steady, a sharp contrast to Crowell's roar. "My dam is destroyed," Crowell snarled, leaning over his saddle horn. "Sabotaged. By you. You are the ringleader, Yazi. You have been fighting this from the start." "The sky broke your dam," Ashki said. "Your wood was weak." "Liar," Crowell shrieked. He was losing control, his face sweating. "You and your people did this. You will pay for it. I am taking you to the marshal in Prescott." "We did nothing," an old woman cried out. "The water came. It took our sheep." "Quiet," Crowell snapped. He nodded to one of his guards, a nervous man with a heavy mustache. "He resists. You shoot him." The guard licked his lips and brought his rifle up, aiming it at Ashki's chest. The air grew thick, electric. Several young Dine men began to move forward, their hands clenching, their eyes on the rifle. It was then that a small girl, no more than 9 years old, darted out from behind her mother. She was frightened, trying to reach her uncle, Ashki. She ran into the open space between them. "Get back!" the guard yelled, his voice cracking. He panicked. He swung the rifle, meaning to fire a warning shot into the dirt, but his horse shied, and he fired too high. The bullet, meant for the ground, tore through the fleshy part of the small girl's calf. She screamed, a thin, piercing sound, and collapsed. For 1 second, the world froze. The guard's face went white with horror. Ashki's face, which had been a mask of stone, twisted into a snarl. The young Dine men roared and lunged, but someone else moved first. "Do not move her." Nell's voice was a whip crack. She had arrived unnoticed at the edge of the village and had seen the entire exchange. She was off her mule and running before the girl had even hit the ground. She dropped her bag in the dirt, her skirt forgotten, and knelt beside the crying child. "Hold still, little one. I'm going to help," she said, her voice instantly gentle, reassuring. She looked up, not at Ashki, but straight at Silas Crowell. Her green eyes were chips of ice. "You!" she said, her voice shaking with a cold, precise fury. "Get this man and his gun away from this child." Crowell was momentarily stunned by her appearance. "Miss Hart, this is not your affair. This is a legal matter." "That is a bullet wound in a child's leg," Nell shot back, her hands already moving, pulling bandages and a bottle of carbolic wash from her bag. "That is my affair. And that man," she pointed a slim, steady finger at the trembling guard, "is a clumsy fool who just shot a 9-year-old girl. Get him back, all of you. You are terrifying her." The confrontation was broken. The tension, which had been about to explode into a gunfight, was now focused on the small, bleeding child and the copper-haired woman protecting her. Ashki seized the moment. The young Dine men were still coiled, ready to attack the guard who had hurt the girl. Ashki stepped between them. "No," he commanded in their language. "Stop. This is what he wants. He wants us to give him a reason to kill." "He shot a child," one young man hissed, his hand on a knife. "And he will die for it," Ashki said, his voice cold. "But not today. Not now. Stand down." It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to pull that guard from his horse. But he saw the other rifles, the men who were not panicked, who were just waiting for an excuse. He held his ground, forcing his men to back away, shielding the guard's life with his own authority. To his men, it looked like weakness. It looked like cowardice. He saw the shame in their eyes, and it cut him deeper than any bullet. Nell worked quickly, Her hands sure. She cleaned the wound. It was a through and through, ugly and bleeding, but the bone was not hit. She bandaged it tightly, her movements economical and efficient. The little girl's sobs quieted to whimpers. Crowell, seeing his advantage lost, tried to regain it. "This changes nothing," he said, his voice blustering. "This was an accident. The girl ran out. My dam is still gone." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. "This is an affidavit. It states that you, the people of this village, will stay away from Sai Canyon, that you will not trespass on my property. You will sign it, or I will have the entire village arrested for insurrection." The elders looked at Ashki. He was shamed, but he was still their leader in this. He looked at the guns. He looked at the crying child. He nodded once, his face carved from stone. An elder took the paper and a pencil, signing with a shaky X. Crowell snatched it back. "You have been warned," he said. He wheeled his horse around. "Let us go." His men, including the white-faced guard, turned and rode away. As they left, Nell noticed Crowell's saddlebag had fallen open. A thick roll of maps and papers was spilling out. A gust of wind, the tail end of the storm, caught one and sent it tumbling across the dirt. "Your map?" she called out, her voice flat. Crowell grunted, annoyed, and reined in his horse. "Grab it," he ordered one of his men. But Nell was closer. She picked up the paper, a surveyor's map of the canyon, and handed it to the man. As she did, her eyes scanned it. She had a sharp, meticulous mind, trained to observe details. She saw the lines of the creek, the plots of land, and she saw the date, stamped in the corner with the county assessor's seal. June 10th, 1883. But the 3 was thick, the ink slightly darker, as if it had been written over another number, as if it had been changed. She handed it over, her expression unchanging, but a cold seed of suspicion planted itself in her mind. The riders disappeared, leaving a silence broken only by the girl's soft crying and the angry, humiliated mutters of the men. The divide in the community was now a canyon, that Sunday. Preacher Caleb's sermon was titled "The Unruly and the Just." He did not name Crowell, and he did not name the Dine, but he spoke of God-fearing men who seek to build, and lawless elements who seek only to tear down. He called for the good people of Dry Mercy to choose a side, and to withhold trade and charity from those who flout the laws of God and man. The boycott began. The Dine were no longer welcome to trade for flour or seed at the general store. The rift was complete. That evening, Nell was cleaning her instruments in her cabin. The light was fading. The small girl was stable, resting with her family. But Nell was exhausted, her fury from the day having cooled to a hard, cold anger. A shadow fell across her open doorway. She looked up, her hand tensing, reaching for a heavy pestle. Ashki Yazi stood there. He did not step inside, but remained on the threshold, a tall, dark shape against the purple twilight. It was the first time they had been truly face to face. "You came," he said. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. "The girl needed a physician," Nell said. Her voice clipped. She turned back to her work, wiping a smear of dried blood from her forceps. "You stopped them," he said. "The young men. You stopped them from killing that man." Nell whirled, her eyes flashing. "What I did," she snapped. "I was stopping a child from bleeding to death. You were the one who held them back. I saw you." She paused, her gaze sharp. "They think you are a coward for it." His face tightened. "What I do is not for you to understand. As-za, woman," he said it like a challenge. "I understand that you saved that fool's life," Nell said, her voice softening slightly. "And in doing so, you probably saved your entire village from being massacred. That is not cowardice. That is tactical." He looked at her, truly looked at her. For the first time, he saw the exhaustion in her face, the smudge of dirt on her cheek, the absolute lack of fear in her eyes. She was not like the other white women. She was not soft. She was not afraid of blood, and she was not afraid of him. "The girl," he said, his voice dropping. She will walk. She will walk," Nell confirmed. "I will see to it. But that is not the end. Is it he will be back? Crowl." Ashki said nothing. He simply looked at her, his gaze intense, assessing. He had seen her medical skill. Now he had seen her courage. But he also saw her sharp, calculating intelligence. She was a person who saw things, like the shame in his men's eyes. "He has a map," Nell said suddenly, thinking aloud. He dropped it. The date on it was wrong. Ashki's head tilted. Wrong? It looked altered, as if an 1880 was changed to an 1883, as if he is lying about when he filed his claim. Ashki's expression did not change, but a new light entered his eyes. He had come to her Hogan intending to give a grudging thanks for the child's care. He had found something else. He had found a weapon. "You see things," he said. It was not a question. "I see what I see," Nell said, "and I see a man who is stealing water and hurting children, and a town that is helping him do it." Ashki held her gaze for another long moment. This woman, this outsider, was a complication he had not foreseen. She was difficult, sharp, and entirely too observant, and he was not sure, for the first time in a very long time, if he was annoyed or impressed. He turned, melting back into the darkness as silently as he had arrived. That night, Ashki Yazi did not sleep. He sat outside his hogan, the cool desert air a useless balm on his spirit. He had held back his men. He had let the white man who shot a child ride away. He had done it for the good of the village, to prevent a slaughter. But it tasted like ash in his mouth. He closed his eyes, and the old memory, the one that never left him, rose up to claim him. The smell of pine and horse sweat, the heavy wool of the blue cavalry jacket, scratching his neck. He was 29 then, proud, the best scout in the territory. Kiyaz, his younger brother, rode beside him, his face full of hero worship. Kiyaz was not a scout. He was just visiting, brought along because Ashki had boasted to the major that his brother knew the canyons as well as he did. The major had a new map, drawn by someone in Santa Fe. "The pass is here," the major had insisted, jabbing a gloved finger. "No," Ashki had said. "The map is wrong. The pass is 2 miles south. This is a box canyon." "You will follow the map, scout," the major had said, his voice flat. "Or I will find a scout who can." And so Ashki, his pride stung, his loyalty to the blue coat stronger than his loyalty to the land, had led them. He had led his brother into the box canyon. The first shot had come from the ridge. It had struck the major's horse. The second had struck Kiyaz. The ambush was perfect. The rifle fire echoed, trapped by the rock walls, sounding like 1,000 guns. Ashki had fought, dragging his brother behind a boulder, firing at shadows. But it was too late. Kiyaz had looked at him, his eyes wide, a dark stain spreading on his shirt. He had tried to speak, but only blood had come. Ashki had carried his brother's body for 10 miles back to the fort. He had laid him down, cut the blue coat from his own body, and walked away. He had walked for 3 days, back to his people, the guilt a living thing, a passenger he would carry forever. He had trusted the white man's map over his own knowledge, and Kiyaz had paid for it. He opened his eyes. The stars were cold. He would not make that mistake again. He would not trust their maps, their laws, or their mercy. 2 days later, Nell was checking the bandage on the small girl's leg. The wound was clean, and the girl, whose name was Sani, was already sitting up, shyly showing Nell a small, carved wooden bird. Nell smiled, her hands gentle as she retied the dressing. "You have a good touch," Sani's mother said, watching her. "You are not rough." "She has a lot of practice," a voice said. Ashki stood in the Hogan's entrance. Nell finished her work and gathered her supplies. nodding her thanks to the mother. She stepped out into the harsh sunlight, Ashki following her. "She will be scarred," Nell said, her voice professional. "But she will not limp. Scars are a part of life." Ashki said. He watched her pack her bag. "You are not afraid." "Why?" "Afraid of what?" Nell asked, not looking at him. "Of you, of your people, or of men with guns?" "Of men with guns," he said. "You walked between them." Nell's hand stilled for a moment. She thought of Crowell, of the trembling guard. Then she thought of a different man, a man in a velvet waistcoat, in a gaslit Boston parlor. She found herself touching her left cuff, her thumb tracing a line on the skin beneath. Ashki saw the movement. He saw the way her face hardened, the way her eyes went somewhere far away and cold. Nell saw him watching her. For some reason, instead of the anger she expected, she felt a sudden, sharp need to make him understand, to make this man of stone and shadow understand why she had not flinched. She pulled back her sleeve. On the pale skin of her inner wrist was a thin, white scar, not from an accident, but from a grip. It was shaped like a half-moon, where fingernails had dug in, again and again. "His name was Augustus," Nell said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "My fiancé, chosen by my father. He was a man who liked to own things. He owned fine horses, a fine house, and he was very keen to own a wife." She met Ashki's dark, unblinking gaze. He did not like it when his property spoke its mind. One night, he decided to teach me a lesson about obedience. She let the sleeve fall. "I left 2 days later. I took my medical kit and my savings, and I did not stop running until I ran out of railroad." She looked at him, her eyes fierce. "I am not afraid of Silas Crowell, because I have looked into the face of men who believe they own the world, and I have walked away from them. I will never," she said, her voice low and shaking with a sudden, deep passion, "be possessed by anyone ever again, and I will not stand by while men like that hurt children, or steal what is not theirs." Ashki was silent. He looked at the scar that was now hidden. He looked at her face. He had thought her a complication. He was wrong. She was a mirror. She, too, was a refugee from a war she had lost, or perhaps one she was still fighting. "So we are the same," he said quietly. "We are both running." "I am not running," Nell said, pulling her bag onto her shoulder. "I am standing. There is a difference." Before he could answer, a cloud of dust announced a rider approaching. It was a young Dine man, his horse lathered. He slid from the horse and spoke rapidly to Ashki. Nell could not understand the words, but the tone was urgent. Ashki's entire demeanor changed. He stood straighter, his face becoming a mask of grim purpose. He nodded to the rider. "Who went to get water?" "What is it?" Nell asked. "A messenger." Ashki said, "Our elders have spoken. They are sending a hatali, a singer, a medicine man. He is old, and he is wise. He is coming to hold the ceremony, to sing for the water, here, at Tse." "A ceremony." "It is our way," Ashki said. "We will ask the holy people to return the water. He will be here in 2 days. He must be escorted to the sacred site, to the canyon." "To Crowell's Dam," Nell said. "It is not Crowell's Dam," Ashki said, his voice hard. "It is our sacred place." "That is suicide," Nell said. "Crowell has armed guards. After the flood, he will shoot you on sight." "Then he will shoot us," Ashki said. "We must do this. It is our law." Nell's mind was racing. A ceremony, elders. It was a direct provocation, even if it was not intended as one. Crowell would see it as an invasion. She made a decision. "You will need a physician, the elder. You said he is old. The journey is hard. The air is bad. I will come." Ashki looked at her, astonished. "No, this is not your fight." "You do not get to decide that," Nell said. "You are bringing elders into a dangerous situation. You need someone to care for them. Also, she added, her voice becoming clinical, if I am there, I can continue my work. I can document the geology of the canyon. I can take measurements of the high water marks. I can prove, with science, that the stream has flowed there for centuries. Your song and my science. We will fight him with both. Her logic was, as always, sharp and unexpected. Ashki did not like it. He did not want this white woman, this sharp-edged piece of glass, involved in his sacred duty. But he also knew she was right. The elder was frail, and her talk of science, of proof, it echoed her words about the map. You will be in the way, he said. I will not, she said. Their argument was interrupted by a new, more immediate threat. It came in the form of the young man she had treated for sunstroke at the dam, the one who had collapsed. His name was Thomas. He found her an hour later, on the edge of dry mercy, as she was buying laudanum. He was nervous, his eyes darting around. Miss Hart, he whispered, pulling her into the alley beside the mercantile. You have to be careful. Thomas, what is it? Are you unwell? No, ma'am, it is not me. It is Crowell. He was twisting his hat in his hands. He is madder than a wet hen about the dam. He says he knows who did it. It was the storm. Nell said, He does not believe it. He is blaming that scout, Yazzie. He has put up money. Miss Hart, a bounty. Nell's blood ran cold. A bounty. $200, Thomas whispered, for the man who brings him in, dead or alive. He is hired on a new man, a man named Vix. He and his crew, they are not dam builders. They are guns. They were talking in the saloon. They are going to hunt him. Nell's mind flew to Ashki, to the ceremony. My God, she whispered. That is not all. Thomas said, he was pale. I do not hold with this. Miss Hart, you were kind to me. You saved me from the sun. Crowell, he is a cheat. What do you mean? Thomas reached into his shirt. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. I handle the ledgers for the mine office. I am not proud of it. I saw this. It is a copy from last year. I kept it in case. Nell took the paper. It was a receipt, a freight bill for mining equipment. But at the bottom, there was a handwritten note. Additional disbursement, $500, for filing and county services, paid in full, June 12th, 1880. 1880. The date she had seen on the map was 1883. The 3 had been written over a 0. This was the bribe. This was the proof that he had falsified his claim, that his water rights were a lie. Thomas, this is, It is dangerous, he said, already backing away. I never saw you. Please, be careful. Vix is a bad man. They are riding out tomorrow at dawn. Nell clutched the paper. It was the smoking gun. She ran to her cabin, her heart pounding. The legal key, the scientific proof, the spiritual ceremony. It was all coming together. She found Ashki by the small stream, washing his face. He has hired guns, she said, without preamble. A man named Vix. There is a bounty on your head, $200. Ashki finished, drying his face on his arm. He looked at her. He had expected this. It does not matter. It does, she insisted. They are hunting you. You cannot go to the canyon. It is a trap. We go, he said. The singer is coming. Then I am coming with you, she said, her voice fierce. You will need more than a song. You will need this. She held out the crumpled receipt. This is your land. Ashki, this proves it. This is the white man's map, and I am going to use it to destroy him. Ashki looked at the paper. He looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the passion. She was not a complication. She was a weapon he did not understand, but one that was now aimed at his own enemy. If they come, Ashki said, his voice so low she barely heard it. If they interfere with the singer, if they bring their guns to the ceremony. He picked up his rifle. checking the action, his movements slow and deliberate. The promise I made to my village, to not shed blood, it ends. I will not let them poison the sacred. I will kill them all. That night, they left. It was not a large group. The Hatali, the singer, had arrived. He was a man made of wrinkles and dignity, his eyes holding the patience of the mountains. He rode a small, white pony. With him were 2 assistants. Ashki led them, his rifle now resting in the crook of his arm. Nell rode her mule, her medical bag on one side, a new bag on the other, filled with survey tools, a compass, a measuring line, and a thick journal to record her findings. They moved as shadows. They bypassed the town, following the high, dry ridges. Away from the patrolled roads, they rode in silence. The only sound, the soft padding of hooves on sand and the jingle of a bridle. The moon had not yet risen. Above them, the sky was a black velvet ocean. The Milky Way was a spilled, glittering river of light, a road of diamonds stretching from one end of the world to the other. They rode toward it, a small, desperate band, heading for the one place that held both their salvation and their certain doom, the Canyon of Stone. The land they traveled was a cruel, broken, beautiful thing. They moved across the high mesa, a great flat table of rock that fell away into canyons on either side. The sun was an enemy. It rose with a white, blinding glare, stripping the color from the landscape, turning everything to shades of pale dust and sharp shadow. The journey was a slow torment. They navigated by following the ghosts of riverbeds, the sand so deep their mules sank to their hocks, their own feet burning through the leather of their boots. The air was not just hot, it was dry. It pulled the moisture from a man's body, cracked his lips, and made his eyes feel raw in their sockets. The singer, Hasteen, rode his pony with a stillness that seemed impossible. He was ancient, his skin a map of 1,000 wrinkles, but his eyes were clear and bright. He and his 2 assistants, young men who were his apprentices, chanted softly as they rode, their voices a low, rhythmic hum that blended with the sound of the wind. Nell, at first, was focused on the purely physical. She monitored Hasteen, watching for signs of sun sickness, ensuring he drank the water she carefully rationed. But on the second day, the land asserted itself as the true adversary. A sound like dry leaves shaken by a giant hand made them all freeze. A rattlesnake, thick as a man's arm and the color of the dust itself, lay coiled in the shade of a rock they were about to pass. Ashki, who was walking point, did not hesitate. His knife was in his hand, a silver blur. He moved, struck, and stepped back, all in a single, fluid motion. The snake's head was severed, the body thrashed, a horrific coiling dance of death. Nell's mule reared, screaming, and she fought to control it. Ashki calmly retrieved his knife, wiped it on the sand, and looked at her. "Watch the shadows," he said. "They are not always empty." That afternoon, a sandstorm hit them. It came from the north, a towering red wall of grit that blotted out the sun. Ashki saw it coming. "Cover!" he shouted, his voice ripped away by the rising shriek of the wind. They huddled behind a low wall of rock, pulling the animals in close. The world disappeared. It was a howling, suffocating chaos. Sand got in their mouths, their noses, their ears. It stung their skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Nell pressed her face into her mule's flank, her own body shielding the small bag of glass bottles that held her most potent medicines. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving them gasping in a strange, reddish twilight. Everything was scoured, and everyone was covered in a thick layer of fine red dust. They had lost a full water skin. It had been ripped from a saddle and was gone, swallowed by the wind. Nell watched Ashki check their remaining supplies. His face was grim. The water was dangerously low. "We cannot stop," he said. "We must keep moving. We will not last a day without more water." Nell said, her own throat raw. "The elder..." "There is no water here," Ashki said, his voice final. "Yes, there is," she said. He turned. She was walking toward a patch of yucca, the sharp, spiky plants that dotted the landscape. She pulled her own knife from her boot. She chose a large, healthy plant and began to hack at the base of its broad, fleshy leaves. It was hard, stubborn work. Ashki watched her, his arms crossed. "What are you doing, woman?" "My grandfather was an Irishman," Nell said, grunting as she sawed at the thick fiber. "He taught me that you can get water from a stone, but a plant is easier." She finally cut through a thick leaf and held it up. She sliced it open. Inside, it was moist, filled with a stringy, wet pulp. She began scraping it into a small tin cup. It was slow, laborious. Ashki said nothing, but he watched. Later, when they made a dry camp, she took the small pot she used for boiling instruments. She put the yucca pulp in it. Then she rigged a piece of clean canvas over it, angled down into a cup, and built a tiny, almost smokeless fire of dry sagebrush. The heat created steam, which condensed on the canvas and dripped, slowly, into the cup. It was a crude distillation, but it worked. By nightfall, she had collected a half-cup of pure, clean water. She took it to Hestine. The old man looked at the water, then at her. He drank it, his eyes smiling, though his lips did not. Nell sat, exhausted, her hands bleeding from the yucca. Ashki came and sat on a rock near her. He did not sit close. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. "I read it in a book on desert botany," she said, bandaging her own palm. "You read it," he said. He had learned to read the white man's language, but the idea of learning to survive from a book was foreign. "And my grandfather," she added. "He was a stubborn man. He said God left a little bit of life in everything. You just have to be stubborn enough to wring it out." Ashki looked at her burned face and her bleeding hands. He gave a single, short nod. It was the first sign of genuine respect he had shown her. That night, the Hatali began his work. By the light of their small fire, he and his assistants cleared a patch of ground. They began to trickle colored sand black, white, blue, and yellow from their palms onto the smoothed earth. Nell watched, transfixed. A picture was emerging. It was a precise, intricate design of holy figures, of 4 mountains, and of a central water source. As Hestine worked, he chanted, his voice a low, beautiful, and profoundly sad sound. He was telling the story of the 4 sacred mountains, the boundaries of the Dine world, and how they had been created. "He is healing the land," Ashki said quietly, his voice different, softer. "He is making it whole again, in the painting. He is reminding the holy people what it is supposed to look like, so they will remember, and make it so." Nell saw the absolute faith on his face, on the faces of the young assistants. This was not just a prayer, it was a repair. It was a form of medicine she had never known, as precise and as necessary as her own sutures. The next day, they knew they were being followed. Ashki found the tracks at dawn. He had ranged far ahead of the group, and came back, his face a hard mask. "What is it?" Nell asked. "Riders, 3 of them. They are professionals," he said. "How do you know?" "They wear boots with military heels." He said, "They are not Apaches. They are not cowboys. They know how to stay hidden. But they left this." He held up a spent cartridge, Sharp's rifle, long range, as if to prove his point. A sound cracked through the still morning air. A whiz followed. So close, Nell felt the air move beside her head. A chip of rock exploded from the cliff face 10 feet above her. A sniper shot. Nell screamed and dove for the ground, pulling Hastine down with her. The assistants grabbed the ponies. "Do not shoot back," Ashki yelled. He was already dragging them behind the boulder. "He is too far. It is a warning." "A warning," Nell panted, her heart hammering. He almost killed me. If he wanted you dead, Ashki said, his eyes scanning the impossibly distant ridge. You would be dead. That was Vix. You know him. I know his kind. He is a manhunter. He is playing with us. He wants us to run. Then let us run, one of the young assistants said, his voice high with fear. No, Ashki said. We go forward. We go slow. We show him we are not afraid. We are not afraid, Nell said, her voice shaking. I am terrified. Good, Ashki said, pulling her up. Terror keeps you low to the ground. Let us move. He will not shoot again. Not yet. The game has just started. They moved all day, the unseen rifle a constant presence at their backs. Ashki was a different man. He was no longer a guide. He was a warrior. He had Nell and the elders move in the shadow of the cliffs, while he and the assistants moved the animals in the open, 100 yards away, making a larger, more confusing target. He was teaching her as they moved. The wind, he said, holding up a pinch of dust. It comes from the west. That is where he will be. He wants the sun at his back and the wind in our faces. The wind carries our sound to him, so we do not talk. Nell nodded, her throat too dry to speak anyway. Late in the afternoon, she had her own lesson to teach. One of the young assistants, in his panic, had slipped on a rock, gashing his arm. It was not deep, but it was bleeding badly into the dirt. He had plastered it with mud and a handful of leaves. Nell saw it and winced. Stop, she ordered. Ashki turned, annoyed at the delay. Nell walked to the young man. Show me. He reluctantly showed her the arm. It was already red and angry. You must never put dirt in an open wound, she said, her voice sharp. She pulled out her carbolic wash and a clean cloth. This will sting. It is nothing, the young man said, wincing. It will be blood poisoning by tomorrow. Nell said, Ashki, you... He came over. What? You are a scout, a warrior. You have been wounded. What do you put on a wound? Pine pitch, he said, or I burn it with a hot knife. Nell shuddered. Fire is clean, I will give you that. But it destroys the flesh. Pine pitch seals the sickness in. You must clean a wound before you seal it. She poured the carbolic over the gash. The young man hissed in pain but held still. This kills the invisible, the germs, the things that cause the rot. Ashki watched her deft, clean movements as she bandaged the arm. Invisible germs. He said, it sounded like a superstition. You have your sand paintings, she said, tying off the bandage. I have my germs. We both believe in things we cannot see. He had no answer for that. They pushed on, the threat at their back making them reckless. They found the canyon just as the sun was setting. Say, it was a massive, beautiful gash in the earth. And at its head, they could see it. The dam. It was larger than Nell had expected. A raw, ugly wall of pale, fresh-cut timber, stretching from one side of the narrow canyon to the other. We will camp here, Ashki said, pointing to a small, hidden alcove. We will go down at dawn. As they were setting up their meager camp, Nell was studying the dam through a small spyglass. Ashki, she said, her voice quiet. Come here. He looked. Look at the base, she said, on the far side, where the water should be deepest. I see it, he said. The wood is new. No, look under the wood. The ground. It is darker. It is wet. Ashki. He built it on sand. That is why it broke in the storm. The foundation is not stable. It is sitting on a layer of shifting silt. He did not hit bedrock. Ashki looked at her, his eyes sharp. What does that mean? It means, Nell said, a cold, hard excitement in her voice, that it is not just illegal, it is dangerous. It is an engineering monstrosity. If a real flood comes, it will not just break. The entire thing will be swept away. It will create a wave of mud that will bury everything for miles. It is a threat to the entire valley, not just to your water, but to the town, to dry mercy. This was it, the technical proof, the leverage. As if the sky had heard her, a sudden, dark cloud passed over the sun. The wind turned cold. Rain, Ashki said, his voice full of disbelief. It was a blind rain, a sun shower. Heavy drops began to fall. Even as the sun shone, a rainbow, bright and fierce, appeared against the canyon wall. Inside, Ashki shouted. The rain was turning cold, icy. They scrambled into a shallow cave in the cliff wall, a hollowed-out space just deep enough to hold them and the animals. They were soaked, and the temperature was dropping fast. "Block the wind," Ashki ordered. He and the assistants used their thick, woven dine blankets and some rough rope from their packs to rig a curtain across the mouth of the cave. It was a fragile barrier, but it cut the wind. They huddled inside, the smell of wet wool and ozone filling the small space. They were trapped, a small band of refugees, listening to the rain hiss against the rocks. The rain stopped an hour after dark. The world was washed clean, and the stars were sharp. "I will check the back trail," Ashki said. "You stay here. Keep the fire small." He was gone for less than an hour. When he returned, he was not the calm guide or the tactical warrior. He was a man hollowed out. He walked into the firelight, and his face was a death mask. "What is it?" Nell said, standing up. "Vix!" Ashki opened his hand. In his palm was a piece of scorched canvas. "He was not on the ridge," Ashki said, his voice flat, dead. "He was behind us. He knew where we would go. He let us pass." He looked at their small collection of supplies by the fire. 2 water skins, a bag of cornmeal. "Our supply camp," he said. "The one we left hidden at the base of the mesa. He found it. He burned it all. The food, the extra blankets." He held up a water skin. It was slashed, the leather gaping open. "He took our water," Ashki said. "He left us 1 skin, enough for 1 day. He has cut us off. We are trapped in this canyon, and we have no water." The morning was a cold, quiet misery. The single water skin was passed around. Each person took a sip, barely enough to wet their tongue. The water was warm and tasted of the leather bag. It was a taste of desperation. Vix had left them just enough to feel the slow approach of thirst. "He does not want us dead yet," Ashki said, his voice a rasp. "He wants us weak. He wants us to run to him. We will not." "We cannot stay here," Nell said, her own voice practical, though her lips were already cracking. "We must go down." Hastine, the singer, nodded. He looked at the meager sip of water in the cup, then at the canyon mouth. "The holy place is waiting." They gathered their remaining gear, Nell's medical bag, her survey tools, a few blankets, and Ashki's rifle. It was a pathetic collection against the vastness of the rock and the malice of the men hunting them. They began the descent into Tsai Canyon. The path was steep, a narrow goat trail of switchbacks. As they got lower, the air grew still, and a new smell rose to meet them. It was not the clean, dry scent of sage. It was the smell of decay. At the mouth of the canyon, on the banks of what should have been a flowing stream, was a flock of sheep, or what was left of it. They were skeletons draped in wool, their bodies scattered where they had fallen, their mouths open as if in a final, silent bleat for the water that had been denied them. The sight was a brutal, physical blow. This was not an abstract fight over rights. It was a war for survival, and this was what losing looked like. Nell felt a wave of nausea, and it was not from the heat. Ashki's face was stone, but his eyes were burning. Hastine and his assistants began a low chant, a song for the dead, for the lost sheep. They walked past the grisly remains, moving toward the ugly, pale scar of the dam. Hastine found the place, a short distance from the dam wall. It was a level, sandy area, sheltered by a high, overhanging wall of red rock. a natural amphitheater. This was where the ceremony would be held. "We begin," Hastings said, as if there were no rifles, no drought, no threat. He and his assistants began the meticulous work of preparing the sacred ground, clearing it of stones, and smoothing the sand with a blanket. Nell left them, her own sense of purpose a shield against the fear. She had a different kind of ritual to perform. She walked to the dam wall. It was even more imposing up close, a monument to greed, loud with the sound of the few trickles of water it had managed to pool behind it. She ignored the structure itself and focused on the canyon walls. She pulled out her journal, her measuring line, and her compass. She began to work, her hands moving with a surgeon's precision. She measured the high water mark from floods long past, a dark stain on the rock 10 feet above her head. She noted the striations in the stone, the layers of sediment. She moved to the dam's base, confirming her suspicion. "Shallow?" she muttered to herself, scratching her boot heel in the wet sand at its edge. "Built on silt." She drew a detailed diagram of the base, noting how the water was already seeping under the main supports, not just through them. She was compiling her evidence, her own sacred text, her testimony for a court of law. An hour into her work, a new sound echoed in the canyon. It was not a gunshot, it was a voice. "Hail the camp." Ashki had his rifle up in an instant. Nell scrambled back from the dam wall, hiding behind a boulder. Hastings and the elders did not stop their preparations. A man was walking down the path. He was not Vix. He was a man from Dry Mercy, the owner of the general store, a man whose hands were clean. He was walking slowly, his own hands held high, showing they were empty. "I come in peace," he called out, his voice high and nervous. "Silas Crowell sent me. He does not want bloodshed." Ashki said nothing, his rifle remaining steady. The store owner stopped 50 yards away. "He knows you are in a bad way," the man said, gesturing to the canyon. "He knows your supplies are gone. He is a reasonable man. He is willing to offer terms." "What terms?" Nell called out, her voice sharp. The man looked relieved to hear a white person. "Miss Hart, thank God. Tell them he will give you food, water, safe passage back to the reservation. All of you. All you have to do is sign this." He held up a piece of paper. "It is just a document, a simple paper saying you renounce all claims to Tsei Canyon, that this is his property, his water, that is all. Sign it, and you can all walk away alive, with full bellies." He gestured behind him, and Nell saw, for the first time, a mule tied up on the ridge, laden with sacks and 2 large water barrels. The man had brought the bribe with him. Hastings, without looking up, spoke in his own language. Ashki translated, his voice flat and cold. "The singer says, you cannot sign away the rain. You cannot sell the sky." "Tell Crowell," Ashki called out, "to send his dogs. We will not sign his paper." The store owner's face fell. "Son, you are all going to die here. Vix is up there. He is not a man for talking. Just sign the paper. It is just words." "They are the only words we have," Nell said, stepping out. "You tell Silas Crowell that we have his receipt for the bribe. You tell him I have documented the dam's flaws. You tell him he is not just a thief. He is a negligent fool who is going to flood the entire valley, including your store, and he will be held responsible." The man's face went pale. He had not expected this. He stammered, turned, and scrambled back up the path, leaving only the echo of his retreat. The mule on the ridge, with its water, disappeared. The offer was gone. The silence that fell was heavier than before. They were truly alone. Ashki's anger was a physical thing now, a vibration in the air. He looked up at the high canyon rim, his eyes scanning the rocks. "Vix!" he roared, his voice echoing, a raw cry of frustration. "I know you are there. Show your face!" There was no answer but the wind. "You are a coward," Ashki yelled, moving into the open. You are paid to kill men? Come and kill me. Stop hiding like a snake. A laugh. It came from everywhere at once. A disembodied, mocking sound. I am not paid to kill you. Scout. Vic's voice echoed down. Not yet. I am paid to make sure you do not damage the property. You are trespassing. Ashki's hands clenched. Then fight me. Just you and me. No rifles, knives, or with your hands. You and I, the winner takes the canyon. The laughter came again, louder this time. You are a damn fool, a brave one. I will give you that. But a fool, I do not fight for free. Now, you all just sit tight. The boss is angry. I am supposed to encourage you to leave. There was a sharp crack. A bullet kicked up dust 10 feet from Hastine. The old man did not even flinch. Stop it, Nell screamed. They are old men. Just a little encouragement. The voice laughed. You all have a nice, thirsty day. I will be watching. The silence returned. Ashki was trembling. His rage so complete he could not speak. He had offered his life, and Vix had laughed at him. Nell, her heart still hammering, returned to her work. She had to focus. She had to finish. She saw a perfect spot to measure the rock strata, a ledge about 20 feet up the canyon wall, accessible by a narrow, crumbling path. One of Hastine's assistants, the young man whose arm she had bandaged, followed her, curious. Be careful, Miss Hart, he said. I will be, she said, climbing. She was focused on the rock, on her measurements. When the sound came, a grinding, shifting sound. It was not Vix, it was the land itself. The recent rain had loosened the earth. The ledge she was standing on, and the path below it, suddenly gave way in a small avalanche of rock and sand. Nell cried out, digging her fingers into the cliff face. Finding a handhold, she was stable. But the assistant, who had been on the path below her, was not. He had been swept off his feet. He had fallen, but a single, gnarled root had caught his shirt, and he was now dangling, his feet scrabbling for purchase, over a sheer drop. Hastine, seeing the boy in peril, rushed forward, his age forgotten. He grabbed for the boy's hand, but he was too far. He lunged, and his foot slipped on the loose scree. The old singer fell, his body twisting, and he cried out, a sharp, terrible sound. He landed hard, clutching his arm to his chest. The crisis was immediate and total. The assistant was dangling. Hastine was injured, and Vix was watching. Ashki ran to Hastine. Nell looked down at the assistant. Do not move, she yelled. Hold on to the root. She scrambled back to their camp. The rope, she yelled at Ashki. He looked up, his face torn between the fallen elder and the dangling boy. The rope from my survey kit, she commanded. Bring it. He grabbed it. It was not a thick rope, but it was strong. Nell grabbed it from him. She ran, her skirt tearing, back to a solid pinnacle of rock above the boy. She looped the rope, her hands tying a knot she had learned on the docks in Boston. She did not test it. She did not have time. She looped the other end around her own waist, securing it with another knot. Hold, Hastine, she yelled to the other assistant. Ashki, when I have him, you pull. She did not wait for an answer. She walked to the edge of the cliff, took a breath, and stepped off. She swung out over the canyon, her body colliding with the rock wall. She grunted, the wind knocked out of her. She found her footing, walking herself down the wall until she was level with the terrified young man. You are all right, she panted, her voice a beacon of calm. I have you. Now, let go of the root. Put your arms around my waist. Do it. He was crying, but he obeyed. He let go, his full weight slumping against her. The rope snapped taut, biting into Nell's waist, driving the air from her lungs. Pull, she screamed. Ashki, pull. Above, Ashki, his muscles straining, began to haul the rope, hand over hand, his own boots slipping in the dust. He was pulling two people. He was pulling the weight of the world. Nell, below, kept her body between the cliff and the young man. Her boots, her knees, her back scraping against the raw rock, taking the punishment to protect him. With a final, desperate heave, Ashki dragged them over the edge. They collapsed in a heap, panting, bleeding, but safe. Nell did not rest. She was on her feet in a second, untying the rope, running to Hastine. The elder was pale, his left arm held at a strange angle. It was a clear break, the bones of the forearm. "Hold him," she said to Ashki. He knelt, his hands, which had just pulled them from the abyss, now becoming a gentle vice, holding the old man steady. Nell took her bag. She gave Hastine a small bottle of laudanum. "Drink," she said. He did. Then she took 2 flat, strong pieces of wood from her splint kit. She took his arm in her hands. "This will hurt," she said, and with a single, firm, practiced motion, she set the bone. Hastine's body went rigid, but his only sound was a sharp intake of breath. Nell, her face covered in sweat and red dust, her clothes torn, her hands bloody, began to bandage the splint, her movements as calm and precise as if she were in a Boston drawing room. When she was done, she sat back on her heels, the adrenaline draining from her, leaving her shaking. Ashki looked at her. He had seen her courage. He had seen her skill. He had just watched her risk her own life, without hesitation, to save one of his. The respect he had felt was now something deeper, something that had no name. He reached out and, with his thumb, gently wiped a smear of blood from her cheek. "You fight hard," he said. "I do not like to lose," she whispered. The moment was broken by the sound of running feet. It was the young rider, the messenger, back from Dry Mercy. He had found a way into the canyon, and he looked terrified. "Ashki," he panted. "The preacher. Caleb. He is holding meetings. He has a paper. He is getting the whole town to sign it, a petition, to the territorial governor. He is calling us a hostile element. He is asking for the army to come, to remove us, permanently." The words hung in the air. This was the final blow. They were trapped by Vix. Their supplies were gone. Their elder was injured. And now, their home was being legally stolen out from under them. Ashki stood up. The banked coal of his anger was now a roaring furnace. He walked to the meager pile of supplies and picked up the axe they had brought to cut firewood. "No more," he said, his voice a low, terrible growl. "No more laws. No more paper." He started walking toward the dam. "Ashki, no!" Nell cried, scrambling to her feet. "He is right," Ashki said, his eyes wild. "Vix is right. I am a fool. I have been listening to your talk of laws and maps, and for what my brother is dead from a map. My people are starving, and your preacher is calling for the army." He hefted the axe. "I am ending this. I am breaking the dam now!" Nell ran and stood in his path. She was smaller, shaking with exhaustion, but she was as immovable as the canyon wall. "You cannot," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "That is what they want. You do this, and you are a saboteur. You are a hostile element. You prove Caleb right. You prove Crowell right. Vix will shoot you before you take 2 swings. It will all be for nothing." "Get out of my way, woman," he roared. "No," she yelled back. "You will not. You will not throw away everything we have done. Your rage is a luxury. Ashki Yazi, we cannot afford it. We have the receipt. We have the engineering proof. We have the law on our side, even if it is a twisted, ugly thing. We have to be smarter than him. We cannot be as brutal." "Your law," he spat. "My people are thirsty." "Then we will bring them the water," she cried. "But we will do it in a way that lasts. We will take the dam, but we will not be destroyed by it." They stood, face to face, the warrior with the axe and the doctor with the bloody hands. "She is right." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the anger. Hasteen, his arm in its new splint, was sitting up. Rage breaks itself upon the stone, the old man said, his voice weak but clear. A song, once begun, must be finished. It is the law. He looked at Ashki, his eyes full of a deep, old wisdom. Your anger is a storm, but the storm passes. The song remains. You, Ashki Yazi, are the guardian. You will guard this ceremony. You will not be the storm. He turned his eyes to Nell. You, Copper Woman, you will be the witness. You will see what we do, and you will tell the world what you have seen. That is your part. Ashki's chest was heaving. He looked at the axe. He looked at Nell. He looked at Hasteen. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered the axe. He did not release his anger, but he contained it. He drove it down, deep inside, where it burned, hot and focused. He nodded once. Night fell. A deep, moonless dark. They were trapped, thirsty, and hunted, but they were not broken. They gathered at the sacred place. They built a small, ritual fire. The only light came from the red, glowing embers. Ashki stood guard, his rifle in his hands, his back to the fire, watching the darkness. Nell sat near Hasteen, her role as witness beginning. The Hatali began. The young assistants unrolled a piece of cured deer skin. A low, rhythmic beat from a single drum began. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It was the sound of a heart, the sound of the earth. Hasteen's voice, weak in body but not in spirit, rose. He began the chant. It was a song of creation, a song of healing, a song that named the 4 mountains, the 4 colors, the 4 directions. It was an act of profound, impossible hope, a collective faith pushing back against the absolute darkness. High above them, on the cold, dark rim of the canyon, a man lay on his belly. He peered through the metal tube of his scope. He could just see the flicker of the fire, a tiny, defiant spark in the vast, black bowl. Vic smiled. He settled the rifle stock against his shoulder. He lit a cigar, the red ember a tiny, malevolent star, mirroring the hopeful one below. The show was about to begin. He was in position. The low, steady heartbeat of the drum was the only anchor in the vast, devouring darkness. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Hasteen's voice rose, a thin, strong thread of sound, weaving a story of creation into the cold air. Nell sat as the witness, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Ashki stood guard, a rifle in his good hand, his body a dark shape against the faint embers. He was the guardian. The song was building, climbing from the earth to the sky, a plea for balance, a demand for life. The young assistants chanted the refrain, their fear momentarily forgotten, lost in the ritual. High above, Vix exhaled a cloud of cigar smoke. He lined up the shot. He was not aiming to kill, not yet. Crowell wanted a show. He wanted terror. He wanted them broken. He smiled. He centered the sight on the largest, most defiant shadow, the guardian. The rifle's crack was obscene. It ripped the sacred song in 2. The bullet whined past Nell's ear and struck Ashki. The force of it, even from that distance, spun him around. He grunted a sharp, choked sound, and fell. For a second, there was only a ringing silence. Then chaos erupted. The young assistants cried out and dove for cover. Hasteen's song faltered, ending on a note of pained surprise. "No!" Nell screamed, her voice breaking. She scrambled on her hands and knees to where Ashki lay. He was on his face, unmoving. "Ashki!" She rolled him over. His eyes were closed, his face pale in the firelight. A dark, spreading stain was soaking the shoulder of his shirt. Then his eyes snapped open. They were blazing. He looked not at her, but at the drum, lying on its side. He pushed himself up with his good arm. His teeth gritted, a low growl in his chest. He was bleeding. He was alive. He ignored Nell. He ignored the panicked cries. He reached out, his hand shaking, and grabbed the drum mallet. He crawled to the drum. He set it upright, and then, with his good hand, he struck it. Thrum. It was weak, a faltering beat. Thrum. Stronger. He struck it again, a rhythm of pure, defiant will. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Hastine, seeing this, took a breath and resumed the chant, his voice quavering but unbroken. This was leadership. It was not a speech. It was a refusal to be broken. "Get down!" Nell hissed at him, pulling at his arm. "He will shoot you again." "He must finish," Hastine called out, his voice strong. "The song must not stop. Then he will bleed to death." Nell snapped back. She ripped her knife from her belt. She held the blade to the fire's embers for 3 heartbeats, sterilizing it. "This is going to hurt," she said to Ashki. "It hurts now," he grunted, not missing a beat. She cut the shirt away. It was a flesh wound, but the bullet was still there, a lump of lead against the muscle. "Hold still." She did not give him laudanum. She did not have time. She pressed her hand against his shoulder to steady him, and, with her other, she dug the point of the knife in. Ashki's body went rigid. His eyes widened, and a sound was ripped from his throat, but he muffled it, turning it into a low, animalistic groan. The drumbeat faltered for just 1 second. Then it resumed. Thrum. She flicked the hot, heavy piece of lead onto the sand. "It is out." Blood welled. She pressed a thick pad of bandage against it. Hard. "Hold this," she commanded one of the terrified assistants. "Press. Hard." It was at that exact moment that new, heavy footsteps and the clatter of rock echoed from the canyon path. "Well, well, well," a voice boomed. "What a charming little party." Silas Crowell emerged into the firelight, flanked by 5 of his hired men. They were not Vic's hunters. They were just armed ranchers, but their rifles were steady. Crowell's face was slick with sweat and rage. "This is private property," Crowell declared, kicking at the edge of the sacred, half-finished sand painting, scattering the image. "You are trespassing, and you," he jabbed a finger at Ashki, "you are under arrest for sabotage." Ashki kept drumming. Thrum, thrum, thrum. "Stop that infernal noise!" Crowell shrieked. He was on edge, the gunshot and the chanting unnerving him. "This is not your land," Nell said, rising to her feet. She stood between Crowell and the wounded man. "This is Dine land. We have proof." Crowell laughed. "You have nothing, Vix," he yelled up at the darkness. "You see them, you make sure none of them leave this little hole. We will wait for sunup to drag them out." They were trapped. Vix above, Crowell below. Ashki stopped drumming. The sudden silence was louder than the beat had been. He looked at Nell, his eyes dark with a new, cold calculation. He spoke in a low voice, for her alone. "The siphon, at the dam. It is a large pipe that feeds his mine. If I cut it, the water he has pooled will be released. It will return to the stream." "You cannot," Nell whispered, her eyes on his bloody shoulder. "You are wounded. They will see you." "They are watching the fire," Ashki said. "They are watching us. They are not watching the dam. I can get there. I can move in the dark." "It is suicide," she said. "It is the only way," he said. He started to rise, to slip away. "Wait," she grabbed his good arm. "I am coming with you." "No, you are the witness. You must stay with Hastine. You must tell what happened here." "My journal," she said, tapping the leather-bound book at her belt, where she had also tucked Crowell's receipt. "My proof. It is on me. If I stay, they will take it. If I go with you, I protect it. Besides," she added, her voice fierce, I am the one who knows the dam's weak point. You are a warrior. I am the engineer. You need me." He looked at her for a long second. Seeing the unshakable truth in her eyes, he gave a single, sharp nod. "Crowl," Nell called out. "The elder, Hastine. His arm is broken. I must tend to him. By the fire." It was a gamble. Crowl grunted. "Fine, but no tricks. Vix is watching." It created the diversion they needed. Nell moved to Hastine, making a show of checking his splint, her body blocking the firelight. Under this cover, Ashki, already a creature of the shadows, pressed himself flat to the ground and began to crawl, inch by inch, away from the tiny, doomed circle of light. Nell waited 3 agonizing minutes. Then she stood up. "I need more water," she said, picking up a canteen. "From the seep." "Sit down, Miss Hart," one of Crowell's men said. "He is an old man," she snapped. "His arm is set, but he is in pain. I need to mix a poultice. Do you want to explain to the preacher how you let an old man suffer?" The man, flummoxed by her sudden fury and the mention of the preacher, hesitated. That was all she needed. She stalked into the darkness, not toward the seep, but toward the dam. She found Ashki 30 yards away, flattened behind a rock. The wind was picking up, and it was carrying a sting. It was not just rain, it was sand mixed with it. A cold, gritty shower that lashed their faces. "This way," he whispered. They moved, not as people, but as drifting shadows, from boulder to boulder. Behind them, they heard Crowell's impatient shouting. Above them, they knew Vix was watching. A sudden shout from the ridge. "Boss, 2 of them, they are moving." A lantern flared to life on the ridge. A beam of light swept the canyon floor. "In here," Ashki hissed. He grabbed Nell's arm and pulled her into a narrow cleft in the rock, a tiny, hollowed-out alcove barely big enough for one. He pushed her in first, then pressed in beside her, his body a shield. They were in the absolute dark, hidden, but they were trapped. The alcove was a dead end. Outside, they heard the sounds of the search. Lanterns were moving on the canyon floor now. Crowell's men. They were pressed skin to skin. Her shoulder blade was against his chest. She could feel the heat of his body, and the sticky wetness of his wound seeping through her sleeve. She could feel his heart hammering against her back. Or maybe it was her own. He was breathing hard, short, shallow breaths against the pain. The sound of boots on gravel came closer. They were 10 feet away. Ashki's body was rigid. He was beyond pain, in a state of pure, focused tension. He was trying not to breathe. Nell could feel him trembling. Or maybe it was her. He spoke. His voice was not a sound, but a breath, a whisper that moved the air against her ear. "The sky, it is dark." She said nothing. She was afraid to breathe. "I am afraid," he whispered. The confession was a physical shock. "I am afraid I will not see the dawn. I will not be here to see the singer finish." It was not death he feared. It was failure. It was the guilt of his brother, Ki Yaz, all over again. He was afraid of failing his people, of leaving his elder in the hands of Crowell. Nell's own fear vanished, replaced by a sudden, aching wave of understanding. This man of rock and shadow was as human and as breakable as she was. He was alone, in the dark, with his deepest shame. She shifted, just a fraction, turning her head. Her cheek brushed the rough wool of his shirt. "Touch me deeper," she whispered. He tensed. He did not understand. He thought she meant, "What?" "You are touching me," she whispered, her voice thick. "But you are not here. You are with your ghosts. I am here, in the dark, with you. Touch my fear. Touch the cold. Do not be alone." He was silent. The searchers were moving away, their voices fading, but they were still close. He turned his head. His face, his cheekbone, was inches from hers. He could not see her, but he could feel the warmth of her breath. He could smell the clean, sharp scent of her skin under the dust and the carbolic. A small, tense, almost painful smile touched his lips, a grimace in the dark. Deeper, his voice was a rasp. If I go deeper, as a woman, I will never find my way out. Then stay, she whispered back. Do not find your way out. Just stay. His good hand, which had been braced against the wall, found hers. Their fingers brushed. They were both shaking. Then their fingers interlaced. A sudden, desperate, iron grip. It was not a caress. It was an anchor. It was a lifeline in a storm. He leaned in. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a kiss of love. It was a kiss of desperation, of shared mortality. It was clumsy and hard, fueled by adrenaline and the profound, immediate fact that they were alive, together, and might not be in the next 10 minutes. It was the taste of dust, and the sharp, metallic tang of his blood, and the impossible, undeniable life of her. The kiss broke, but their hands remained locked, a single point of contact in the universe. They rested their foreheads against the cold, gritty stone, their breathing ragged, but, for the first time, in sync, they were anchored. Hey, over here, I see something! A shout. The lantern light was returning. We must go, he breathed. He pulled his hand free. The loss was a physical pain. Where? The slot, a narrow way. Tsuan. He grabbed her hand. Move. They slipped out of the alcove. The searchers were at the far end of the rock face. There! A man yelled. Ashki pulled her into a crack in the wall, so narrow she had to turn sideways. They were in a slot canyon, a passage carved by water, a black, tight tunnel. They were running, stumbling over unseen rocks. Behind them, they heard the men enter the slot. We have them trapped! A lantern appeared, bobbing, blinding them. Stop, Ashki said. He pushed her into a small cutout. The men were gaining. My mirror, Nell panted, digging in her belt. My survey kit. She pulled out a small, steel signal mirror. Give it to me. His hand was steady. He took the mirror. He angled it, catching the light of the pursuer's own lantern. He flashed it, high up, on the canyon wall far ahead of them. They will think we are climbing. He's up there, a voice yelled from behind them. He is climbing! A shot. The bullet screamed off the rock, 20 feet above their heads. The men stopped, confused, firing at the phantom reflection. It bought them the seconds they needed. Now, Ashki said, run! They burst out of the end of the slot canyon. They were in the open, before them, 100 yards of flat, rocky ground, and at the end of it, rising like a black, jagged wall against the sky, was the dam. The wind howled. The gritty rain lashed their faces. A brilliant blue-white fork of lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene. In that second, they saw the dam, a monstrous, pale skeleton. And they saw Vix, on the ridge above it, a rifle in his hands, turning toward them. The thunder that followed was a roar, the sound of the world breaking. They were exposed. They were at the base of the dam. It was the point of no return. The flash of lightning was a merciless photographer, capturing their silhouettes against the pale, raw wood of the dam. The thunder was not a sound but a blow, a physical punch to the chest. Down, Ashki yelled, shoving Nell toward the base of the structure. A rifle shot cracked from the ridge above, the bullet splintering the timber where they had been standing. Vix. He cannot see us if we are against the wall, Ashki shouted over the rising wind. Move! They scrambled, staying low, their backs scraping against the rough planking. Crowell's men were still in the canyon, their lanterns bobbing, their shouts lost in the storm. They were at the heart of the beast. The dam was groaning, a high, thin sound of wood under impossible pressure. The small lake pooled behind it was a churning, muddy soup. The siphon pipe. Ashki pointed to a large, black iron pipe, as thick as a man's body, that was drawing water from the pool. I must cut it. No! Nell screamed, grabbing his arm. Her mind, trained in observation, was working faster than his. You will be exposed, and it is too slow, look. She pointed not at the pipe, but at the base of the dam, where the earth was a wet, bubbling mess. It is failing. Your axe was the wrong idea. This thing is not just a wall, it is a plug. If it breaks all at once, the mud wave. She did not need to finish. The image of the dead sheep, the thought of the camps downstream, of Dry Mercy itself, hung in the air. We have to release the pressure, she said, her voice a sharp, clear instrument. Not all at once, slowly. The sluice gate. Where is it? Ashki pointed to a large, iron wheel mechanism on a wooden platform near the center of the dam. There, but it is locked. Then you must break the lock, Nell said. I will get the proof. He looked at her, confused. Proof now? Yes, now. She was already pulling her survey tools from her bag. She unhooked a small, heavy, pointed steel marker. While you do that, I will mark the foundation. I will show exactly where it is failing. It was an act of insane, rational courage. While Ashki ran, staying low, toward the sluice gate, Nell dropped to her knees in the mud at the dam's base. Another lightning strike gave her all the light she needed. She saw the fissure, a crack in the silt foundation where water was actively undermining the entire structure. She jammed the steel marker deep into the mud right next to it. She pulled her journal and a charcoal pencil. Her hands were shaking, but her lines were firm. In the intermittent, strobing flashes of lightning, she sketched the base of the dam, the marker, the fissure, and the seeping water. It was a diagram of catastrophic failure. Ashki reached the sluice gate. It was held by a thick, heavy chain and an iron padlock. He raised his axe. Stop right there, Yazzie. The voice was not Vic's. It was Silas Crowell. He had circled around, his men with him, and he was not alone. Beside him, wearing a rain slicker and a look of profound discomfort, was a man with a tin star, a deputy sheriff. You are a hard man to kill. Crowell spat, his pistol aimed at Ashki's chest. But your time is up. Deputy, arrest this man. He is destroying my property. Ashki stood, his hand still on the axe. He was trapped. He is not destroying it, Nell said, stepping out from the shadows, her journal held like a shield. He is trying to save it, and this is not your property. Crowell's eyes widened. Miss Hart, you have chosen the wrong side. He nodded to the deputy. I have the law with me. Deputy, show them. The deputy cleared his throat, pulling a damp paper from his coat. By the authority of the territory of Arizona, I have here an order of sequestration to seize this land known as Cy Canyon, pending an investigation into hostile actions by the Dine. An order, Nell said, her voice dripping with contempt. An order based on what? Based on my legal, filed claim, Crowell said, smiling, dated 1883. You are a liar, Nell said, her voice clear and carrying over the wind. She stepped into the lantern light. You filed in 1880, before the new Homestead Act gave the Dine shared rights. I have seen the map, and I have this. She pulled the crumpled, damp receipt from her journal. This is a copy of your ledger, Mr. Crowell, showing a $500 payment to the county clerk for filing services in June of 1880. The same month you filed. You did not just file a claim. You bought it. You bribed a federal agent. That is a federal crime. The deputy's face went white. He looked from the receipt in Nell's hand to Crowell, who was no longer smiling. That is a forgery. Crowell blustered. Is it? Nell said. And is this a forgery? She held up her drawing. "This dam is built on silt. It is failing, right now. You did not just bribe a clerk. You built a weapon. It is about to collapse and flood the entire valley. You are not a businessman. You are a mass murderer." Ashki had been silent, letting her words, her white man's map, do their work. But now he spoke. He did not speak to Crowell or the deputy. He spoke to the storm. His voice was low, not a shout, but it cut through the wind. "You do not understand," he said. "You talk of paper. You talk of dates. You stand here and you fight for a piece of wood." He pointed to the trickling water. "Tuaina, water is life. It is not a thing to be owned. It is not property. It is the blood of our mother. It is the tears of our ancestors. It is the first thing a new child is given." He looked at the deputy, his eyes burning with a moral fire that eclipsed the lightning. "You come here with your paper. You help this man steal our blood. You help him choke our mother. There is no law for that. There is only shame." The deputy, a simple man, looked shaken. He lowered his gun. "Mr. Crowell, this is not what you said." "He is a damn savage," Crowell roared. "He is filling your head with heathen nonsense. Shoot him." "No," the deputy said, finding a sliver of courage. "I will not. We are taking this to the judge." "Then I will," Crowell snarled, raising his pistol. A shot, but it did not come from Crowell. It came from above. A man was sliding down the loose scree of the ridge, landing like a cat in their midst. It was Vix. He was done playing games. "Boss," Vix said, his rifle held easily. "You talk too much." In one swift, brutal motion, Vix grabbed Nell. He spun her around, his arm locking around her throat. The muzzle of his pistol pressed hard against her temple. "Drop your guns," Vix said, his voice calm, almost bored. "All of you, him too." He nodded at Ashki. "Drop the axe. Scout." Ashki's face was a mask of pure, cold hatred. His friend, his anchor, was a shield for his enemy. "Let her go, Vix," Ashki said, his voice dangerously low. "This is between us." "It is all about the money. Scout," Vix said, his arm tightening. Nell made a small, choked sound. "And the lady here is my insurance. Now, the axe." Ashki let the axe fall to the mud. The deputy had dropped his pistol. Crowell was smiling again, a wet, ugly gash in his face. "Good," Vix said. "Now, boss, pay me my 200, and I will finish this." "Kill him," Crowell said, pointing at Ashki. "Then her." "No," Vix said. "Just him. The bounty was for him. Killing her is extra. That will be another 50. "Vix," Ashki said, his voice calm. He held his good hand up, palm out. His other arm, his wounded one, hung at his side. "You do not want her. You want me. Look at me." Vix smiled, his pistol still at Nell's head. "I'm looking. Scout." Ashki took a small step. "Your fight is with me. I am the one you hunted. And I caught you." "Did you?" Ashki said. From the sleeve of his wounded arm, a small, dark object fell into his hand. It was the skinning knife he had used on the rattlesnake. "Crowell," Ashki said, his eyes locked on Vix. "You are paying him. He is a fool. He left his back open." Vix tensed, his eyes flicking. "What?" It was the only distraction Ashki needed. His good arm moved. It was not a throw. It was a flick of the wrist, fast as a snake's tongue. The small, heavy knife flew, not at Vix, but at the lantern the deputy had dropped. It struck the glass. The lantern exploded in a flash of oil and flame. Darkness, absolute, sudden, and total. "Nell down!" Ashki roared. Vix, blinded, instinctively fired his pistol. The flash, a foot from Nell's head, was deafening, but she had already dropped. using her full weight to drive the heel of her boot into Vix's instep. He howled, his grip breaking. A chaotic, panicked firefight erupted in the pitch black. Crowell's men, seeing the flashes, fired at everything. The deputy was yelling. Vix was cursing, firing at shadows. Ashki was not firing. He was a shadow. He tackled Nell, rolling them both behind the heavy wooden supports of the sluice gate. And then the sky tore open. It was not a normal bolt of lightning. It was a direct, shattering strike. It hit the top of the canyon wall, directly above the dam. With the sound of an artillery shell, the ground heaved. A section of the ridge, 1,000 tons of rock and mud, loosened by the rain and shaken by the blast, gave way. It slid, a slow, grinding avalanche, and it hit the dam. The structure screamed. The wooden beams, the main supports, snapped like twigs. The dam did not just break, it exploded. "It is going!" Nell screamed, her voice a thin thread of terror. A wall of water, mud, and splinters, a dark, churning monster, was unleashed. "Run!" Ashki yelled, pulling her to her feet. But in the chaos, Crowell was also running. He was clambering up the bank, trying to get to his horse. Vix, his leg injured, was trying to do the same, abandoned by his men, who had been scattered by the flood. Ashki had a choice, a fraction of a second. He could see Crowell, a shadow escaping. He could see his axe, lying in the mud. He could pursue his enemy. He could end it. Or he could save them. The sluice gate, though broken, was still holding back a part of the flood. But the main structure was gone. The water was tearing a new, violent channel. "Ashki!" Nell screamed, pointing. "The gate! It is still locked. It is funneling the water. It is going to take out the whole canyon wall." He saw it. The force of the water, trapped by the one remaining piece of the dam, was scouring the canyon base, threatening to bring the entire wall down on top of Hastings' ritual site. He did not hesitate. He left Crowell to the darkness. He ran to the sluice gate, grabbed his axe, and with all the strength of his rage, his guilt, and his desperate, burning hope, he struck the iron lock. Sparks flew. He struck it again. The chain snapped. He put his good shoulder to the heavy iron wheel and pushed. It was stuck. He roared, a sound that was not human, a sound of pure, elemental force. The wheel turned. The gate opened. The sound was the sound of the earth breathing, a great cleansing whoosh as the trapped water, the stolen life, was released. It poured down the center of the creek bed, its rightful path, a thundering, clean, and powerful torrent. It relieved the pressure on the canyon wall. The flood, which had been a monster, was now just a river reborn. Nell and Ashki clung to the platform, soaked, shaking, as the water roared past them, cleansing the canyon of the dead sheep, the dead grass, and the memory of the dam. When the last of the water had passed, there was a strange, wet silence. "Ashki," Nell panted. He was still standing, his hand on the wheel. "It is done," he said. In the first, faint, gray light of the false dawn, they looked across the canyon. Crowell was gone. His men were gone. But lying near the bank, his leg at a sharp, unnatural angle, was a man. He was groaning. It was Vix. He had been caught by the edge of the flood, and his own men had left him. The return to Dry Mercy was a strange, grim procession. They did not come as victors, but as exhausted, mud-caked witnesses. Ashki and the other assistants carried Hastings on a makeshift litter, his face pale, but his eyes clear. Nell walked beside him, her bag heavy, her journal and the precious receipts safe. Behind them, slung over his own horse, came Vix. The deputy, his face a mask of grim determination, had bound his hands and splinted his broken leg. The mercenary was silent, his lips white with pain, his eyes burning with a cold, contained fury. When they reached the town, The news of the dam's destruction had preceded them, but the story was twisted. It was not of a natural disaster, but of a war. Crowell had returned first, his horse lathered, his face a mask of righteous indignation. He had told the town that the Navajos, led by Ashki and the white woman, had attacked his men and blown up the dam with dynamite. The town was a powder keg. The deputy, however, had gone straight to the one man in town who held real authority, the territorial circuit judge, who happened to be in dry mercy for the week, settling land disputes. His name was Judge Harlan, a man with a reputation for being thorough, humorless, and absolutely immune to bribes. Harlan, upon hearing the deputy's breathless, terrified account of gunfire, fraud, and a collapsing dam, called for an immediate emergency hearing. He did not convene it in the church, which he rightly saw as Preacher Caleb's territory, but in the largest neutral space, the saloon. By 10 o'clock that morning, the saloon was packed. The gambling tables were pushed to the walls to make room for benches. It was hot, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat, whiskey, and fear. The dine, who were normally not allowed, stood in a silent, watchful group by the door. Ashki, Hastine, and Nell were given a table at the front. Crowell and his men sat at another. Vix, under guard, was in a chair by the judge's bench, which was a hastily cleared poker table. Judge Harlan, a man with a heavy gray beard and eyes that missed nothing, gavelled the room to silence. "This is not a formal trial," he said, his voice a low boom. "This is a territorial hearing to establish the facts and prevent, as I am told, an imminent public disaster. Mr. Crowell, you made the complaint. You will speak first." Crowell stood, his voice ringing with false injury. "Your Honor, it is simple. These hostiles, led by that renegade scout Yazzie and aided by this woman of questionable character," he sneered at Nell, "attacked my property. They destroyed my dam, a dam I built legally, on my own land, with my own money. They sabotaged it. They are murderers and terrorists, and I demand the army be called." Preacher Caleb, from the crowd, shouted, "He is right, it is an offense against God and progress." "Silence," Judge Harlan said, his gaze not leaving Crowell. "You claim the land is yours. You claim the dam was legal. You claim they destroyed it." "I do," Crowell said. "Then I will hear from the accused." The judge said, "Miss Hart, you are an officer of, well, you are a physician. I will hear from you." Nell stood. She was still in her torn, mud-stained skirt. Her hair was loose, matted with dust. Her hands were bloody, but her voice was clear. "Your Honor," she said, "Mr. Crowell is lying, and I have the proof." A silence fell on the room. "First," she said, "the land. Mr. Crowell claims he filed in 1883. That is a lie." She produced the crumpled receipt. "This is a copy of his ledger, showing a $500 payment to a county clerk in 1880. The year he actually filed, it was a bribe to secure a false date, to circumvent the territorial laws that protect dine grazing rights. The claim is fraudulent." Crowell surged to his feet. "A forgery, a lie." "Sit down, Mr. Crowell," the judge said, his eyes on the receipt. "Continue, Miss Hart." "Second," Nell said, "the dam. He claims it was sabotaged. Your Honor, I am not an engineer, but I am a woman of science. That dam was a catastrophe waiting to happen." She unrolled her journal, her hands sure, and laid her charcoal drawing on the table. "He built the dam on a foundation of unstable silt. It was not destroyed by us. It was destroyed by its own incompetence, by the rain, and by a bolt of lightning. It was a miracle that saved this valley. Had that dam held for another week, it would have collapsed in a way that would have sent a wave of mud all the way to this town. He did not build a dam. He built a weapon, aimed at everyone downstream." Her words, the scientific certainty, hit the room harder than an axe. The ranchers and townsfolk who lived downstream began to murmur. They were looking at Crowell with new, fearful eyes. "Finally," Nell said. "The attack. Mr. Crowell's men fired on us first. They wounded this man." She pointed to Ashki's bloody shoulder. "While he was participating in a peaceful, religious ceremony, they held me at gunpoint. They hunted us." She had finished. She sat down. The judge looked at the drawing. He looked at the receipt. Then he looked at Hastine. "And you," the judge said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You are the singer. What is your testimony?" Hastine spoke, his voice weak. Ashki stood and translated, his own voice low, his anger gone, replaced by a simple, profound gravity. "He says," Ashki translated, "that his grandfather was born in that canyon, and his grandfather's grandfather. He says, you ask for a date on a paper. He asks, what is the date of the sky? What is the date of the rocks? The stream does not belong to us. It belongs to itself. It belongs to the thirsty. We do not sing to own it. We sing to thank it." The simple, poetic truth of it, after Nell's hard facts, left the room breathless. Preacher Caleb tried to speak, but the judge waved him to silence. "I have heard from the accused." The judge said, "I will now hear from a witness, Mr. Vix." Vix, who had been listening with a strange, detached amusement, was nudged forward by the deputy. "Mr. Vix," the judge said, "you are a hired gun. You are accused of attempted murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. You have no loyalty here. Why should I listen to you?" Vix gave a short, barking laugh, which ended in a grimace of pain. "Because I am the only other man in this room, besides Crowell, who knows the whole truth, and I am not a big fan of being left for dead." His eyes cut to Crowell, and they were full of venom. "I will make you a deal. Judge," Vix said, "you get me a federal marshal to take me to Prescott, and not a local cell, and I will tell you everything. I want leniency. I will testify." "I am listening," the judge said. "Crowell hired me a week ago. He hired me and my men for $200 to remove the Navajo." Vix smiled. Remove, harass, whatever it took. He wanted the scout, Yazzie, dead. He said it would break them. He paid us half. He said the dam breaking was a setback, but he did not care. He was going to rebuild it, hire, and post guards. He told me, and I quote, "that water is worth more than all the gold in the territory." He said he did not care who he had to kill or bribe to keep it. He looked at Nell, and he was real clear, boss, that the woman was to be scared off, or, if she would not scare, dealt with. He did not like her snooping. The room was silent. Silas Crowell was a dead man walking. He was ruined. The townsfolk were staring at him, not with anger, but with the cold horror of betrayal. He had been willing to risk their lives, their town, for his mine. "Thank you, Mr. Vix," the judge said. He turned. "Mr. Yazzie, you have been silent. Do you have anything to add?" Ashki looked at the judge. He looked at his people, at Hastine, and at Nell. He stepped forward. "Yes," he said, "I do." He did not speak of the dam. He did not speak of the water. He spoke of himself. "My name is Ashki Yazzie. I was a scout for the United States Cavalry," he said, his voice resonant. "I wore the blue coat. I took the pay. And I was proud." He paused. And the confession he had held in the dark, the one he had shared only with Nell, he now gave to the world. 9 years ago, I led a patrol. My younger brother, Ki Yaz, was with me. The major had a map. I told him the map was wrong. I knew the land. I told him it was a box canyon. He questioned my honor. He said I was not a loyal soldier. Ashki's voice broke, just for a second, and he mastered it. So I did what he asked. I held my pride above my knowledge. I led him, and I led my brother, into that canyon. Ki Yaz was the first to die. I trusted the white man's paper over my own people, over my own heart. I ran. He looked at Crowell. When this man came, I saw the same thing, the same pride, the same paper, the same lies, and my first thought was to kill him, to use the axe, to meet his violence with my own. He turned and looked at Nell, a look of such profound, raw gratitude that the entire room felt it. "But this woman," he said, "she showed me a different way. She showed me that my brother did not die because of a bad map. He died because I was afraid to trust, afraid to stand for the truth, even if it cost me. She, a stranger, was not afraid. She came with her own map, a map of science, a map of facts, and she did not run." He faced the judge. "We do not want war. We want life. We want the water. We are here today, using your law, your court, to ask for it. We are not hiding. We are not running. We are done running." He stepped back. The hearing was over. Judge Harlan looked at the faces in the room. He saw the hatred in Preacher Caleb's eyes, the greed in Crowell's, the fear in the townsfolk, and the exhausted dignity in the faces of the dying. He brought his gavel down. Bang! "It is the judgment of this court," he announced, "that the claim filed by Silas Crowell in 1883 is invalid, based on clear evidence of fraud and bribery." Bang! "It is the further judgment that the structure, the dam, was built without legal authority and with criminal negligence, posing a direct threat to the township of Dry Mercy and all downstream residents." Bang! "A formal order is issued for the full and safe dismantlement of any remaining structure. The cost of this dismantlement will be borne by Mr. Crowell's estate." Bang! "Finally, the court recognizes the historical and vital collective use rights of the Cy Canyon stream. That water will be managed by a community trust to be shared, with first priority given to the Dine people and all downstream residents, for life and livestock. So ordered." It was a total victory. Silas Crowell sat, his face purple, his entire world, his fortune, his power, gone in 3 minutes. He was a man with nothing left to lose. He began to shake. You cannot," he whispered. "Heathens, you have all, you—" He stood up, his chair scraping. His eyes were wild. He was a man insane with loss, and his hand went, not to his pistol, but to a derringer he kept in his boot. He was fast. He pulled the small, deadly gun. "It is all mine," he screamed, leveling it, not at the judge, not at Ashki, but at Nell, the one who had started it all. Ashki lunged, but he was not the closest. "Silas, no." It was the sheriff, the real sheriff, a man named Brody, who had been standing, silent, at the back of the room the entire time. The hesitant man, the man who had, until now, chosen to do nothing. Sheriff Brody moved. He was not fast. He was not a warrior. He was just a man. He did not draw his gun. He simply stepped in front of Nell, his body a shield, his hands up. Crowell, in his madness, fired. The sound was deafening in the small room. The sheriff grunted, stumbling back, clutching his arm, but he did not fall. He stood his ground. He had made his choice. In that second, the deputy and 2 ranchers were on Crowell, wrestling him to the floor, pulling the gun from his hand. It was over. The sheriff looked at his arm, at the blood welling through his shirt. "Well," he said to Nell, his voice shaky, "it appears you have another patient, Miss Hart." As Nell, her hands finally trembling, reached for her medical bag, another sound was heard. It was the church bell. Clang, clang, clang. Preacher Caleb was in the back, his face ashen. He was not ringing it. It was his wife. She was ringing the bell, over and over. Nell looked at Ashki, confused. "It is not a warning," Ashki said. a small, slow smile touching his lips for the first time. "It is a celebration." He walked to the open door of the saloon. The sun was high, and far in the distance, they could all hear it. A new sound. The sound of the liberated, muddy, powerful river roaring past the edge of town. The water had returned. The dismantling of the dam was not a spectacle. It was a chore. Judge Harlan's order had been clear. What remained of the splintered wood was hauled out, piece by piece, not by soldiers, but by the community. The men who had worked for Crowell, who had been building his weapon, were now unemployed and facing a town that looked at them with suspicion. Ashki, in a move that surprised everyone, spoke for them at a town meeting. "They are not miners," he said, standing at the front of the saloon, which had become the new center of town life. "They are men who know how to move earth and timber. We have a river. We need to guide it, not choke it." The Community Water Trust, as the judge had named it, was born. The former dam workers were hired, their pay coming from a new territorial fund. Their boss, a strange and effective committee, Ashki, Sheriff Brody, and the mercantile owner. They learned from the Dine how to build with rock and earth, not against the water, but with it. They learned to build low, guiding walls to feed irrigation ditches, and how to create holding ponds that saved the water without stopping its flow. They were working for the community, not for one man's greed, and the pay was steady. It was a start. Nell, having seen Sheriff Brody's arm heal clean and Vic's leg set for transport, turned her attention to the new, flowing water. It was alive, but it was also muddy and carried the memory of the sickness. She established her clinic. It was not a building. It was a tent, set up on the clean, dry bank of the new stream, halfway between the town and the Dine village. It was a statement, a place of healing that belonged to neither, and thus to both. She began to teach. She did not just treat sickness, she taught how to prevent it. She gathered the women from the town and the mothers from the Hogans. "The water is life," she said, echoing Ashki's own words. "But it must be clean. You must boil all drinking water for 1 minute." She taught sanitation. She taught how to clean wounds with boiled water and soap, not mud. She taught how to use a clean cloth for a newborn. And the children came. First, the Dine children, curious about the copper-haired woman. Then the town children, bored and drawn by the activity. Soon, they were not town and Dine. They were just children, playing by the water, learning together in Nell's makeshift open-air school how to wash their hands. The healing of the community was a slower, more awkward process. The Sunday after the hearing, Preacher Caleb stood at his pulpit. The church was full. Every person was there, waiting. His sermon was not from his usual fire and brimstone. He looked tired and old. "I spoke to you of choosing a side," he said, his voice quiet, his gaze on his own hands, clasped on the Bible. "I spoke of progress and law. I was wrong." He looked up, his eyes finding Ashki, who stood, by invitation, at the back of the church. "I mistook my own pride for the will of God," Caleb said. "I mistook greed for progress. I helped to drive a spike of hatred into this community. And I am sorry. I ask for your forgiveness." It was a simple, public, and shattering confession. The true act of reconciliation, however, came 2 days later. It was not public. Nell was at her tent when she saw a figure walking from the town preacher Caleb's wife. The woman walked all the way to the Dine camp, her back rigid. She was carrying a 50-pound sack of flour. She did not say a word. She just set it down at the entrance to the village, turned, and walked away. It was an offering. It was accepted. Vix left town under the guard of a federal marshal. Nell had tended to his leg, her movements professional, her face unreadable. He had watched her, his expression a mix of pain and a strange, grudging respect. When the marshal came for him, Vix asked to see her. "So," he'd said, his hands in chains, "you won." "The law won," Nell had replied, cleaning her instruments. The law? He'd snorted. You won. Miss Hart, you and the scout, you are a harder pair than I figured. The marshal had let him out, but on the cot where he had lain, there was a small, heavy leather bag. Nell had picked it up. Inside was a stack of silver dollars. She had counted them. $50. The extra price he had quoted Crowell for her life. It was not a payment. It was a piece of his strange, broken code, atonement. The land itself began to heal. The first true, gentle rain of the season fell. It was not a violent storm, but a soft, steady, life-giving soak that lasted for a whole day. The world turned anew, bright green. The stream, which had been a muddy torrent, settled. It ran clear and deep, its surface rippling, its voice a low, happy murmur. With the land healing, Ashki knew it was time. The song was interrupted, he said to Nell. It must be completed. Hastin must give thanks. This time, it was not a secret. Desperate act, it was a celebration. Ashki sent riders, inviting not just his own people, but the town, all of it. They came. The entire town of Dry Mercy walked to the canyon, which was no longer a place of death, but of life. Sheriff Brody, his arm in a sling, the mercantile owner, the former dam workers, with their families, even Preacher Caleb and his wife. Hastin, his own arm splinted, oversaw the creation of a new, beautiful, and complex sand painting. It was not a painting of repair, but of gratitude. It showed the 4 mountains, and in the center, a flowing, abundant stream, with green corn growing on its banks. Nell sat on a blanket, near the edge of the sacred space. Ashki sat with his people, near Hastin. He did not ask her to join the inner circle. He did not need to. She was the witness. She sat, her hands in her lap, her heart full, watching a ritual she did not understand but profoundly respected. The boundaries were clear, and in that clarity, there was a deep and settled peace. Later, when the ceremony was over, and the people were sharing a feast of roasted corn and mutton, Nell and Ashki found themselves alone, walking by the stream. That wood, Nell said, pointing to a pile of pale timber, salvaged from the dam, stacked high on the bank. What will you do with it? It is dead, Ashki said. It holds bad memories. We will burn it. No, Nell said, a sudden idea striking her. Do not burn it. Let us change it. For the next week, in the quiet hours of the evening, they had worked, Ashki, with his sharp knife and strong hands, Nell, with her eye for balance and her knowledge of angles. They took the raw, pale wood, the wood that had been a prison for the water. They cut it, they sanded it, they shaped it. They did not speak much as they worked. They did not need to. They were building something. On the last day, they put the pieces together. It was a rocking chair, wide and strong and smooth. Together, they carried it down to the bank of the stream, to a spot under a tall cottonwood. Ashki sat in it first. He leaned back. The chair rocked, its runners moving smoothly on the flat stones. He looked at the water. It is good, he said. He stood and offered her the seat. Nell sat down. She leaned back, the wood warm against her back, and rocked. The motion was like a cradle, like the rhythm of the stream, a symbol of rebirth, built from the wood of their oppression. Ashki sat on the ground beside her, his back against the tree. The sun was setting, turning the rippling water to gold and lavender. Hastin told me a word, Nell said quietly, her voice tentative. From the song, The Blessing Way. She tried to say it, Sizila Alel. It came out wrong, the sounds mangled by her Boston accent. Ashki's head was down, and his shoulders began to shake. Nell stopped, mortified. I am sorry, I have insulted it. He looked up at her, and his face was something she had never seen. It was split in a wide, clear grin, his eyes crinkling, A real, deep, unrestrained laugh burst from his chest. It was a sound as clean and as healing as the river itself. "No," he said, still laughing. "You did not insult it." He said the word again, slowly. "Sizzy, my heart." He said it again, correcting her, his voice soft. "Sizila alil." She tried again, mimicking him. "Sizila alel." It was still wrong, but it was closer, and as she looked at him, at his open, unguarded face, she began to laugh too, a shared, simple, healing laugh that bounced over the sound of the running water. The new channel was a line of life, dug by the hands of the entire community. It was not a deep, straight gash like the ones the Army engineers favored, but a winding, gentle curve that followed the land's own logic. It was the work of the Water Trust, a merging of Dine wisdom and settler engineering. The water, now guided, ran clear and strong. By late fall, the banks of the new channel were no longer bare earth. They were green, small. Hardy stalks of corn stood in rows, their tassels drying in the crisp air. And beside them, a sight that made the mercantile owner weep, a field of cotton, the bolls bursting, white and clean as new snow. It was not a massive harvest, not yet, but it was a promise. It was sustainable, shared prosperity, born not of theft but of work. The news from the wider world filtered in. Silas Crowell had been taken by the federal marshals, along with the now convicted county clerk. The case had, as Nell had predicted, become a much larger scandal. The investigation into the $500 bribe had unearthed a network of graft and corruption that stretched across 2 counties. Territorial officials were being questioned. Land speculators were fleeing. Crowell's greed had not just been his own ruin, it had been the key that unlocked a much larger, darker room. Dry Mercy, for the first time, was known for something other than its ironic name. It was known for being the place where the corruption had finally been stopped. One afternoon, the stagecoach brought Nell a letter. It was the first she had received from Boston in over a year. The paper was thick, creamy, and smelled faintly of her mother's lavender. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The words were full of a suffocating kindness. Her father, it seemed, had heard of the terrible business with Crowell. He had read an account in a New York newspaper. He was relieved she was safe from the savages and the ruffians. Her fiancé, Augustus, had been convinced to break the engagement. Her indiscretion was forgiven. She was, the letter said, to come home. He had enclosed a draft for $100 for her passage. Nell stood by her clinic tent, the letter in her hand. She looked at the creek, which was sparkling in the afternoon sun. She looked at the children, a mix of pale, freckled faces and brown, black-haired ones, all sitting together by the water, learning to read from a single, tattered copy of Robinson Crusoe. She went into her tent. She took out a fresh piece of paper. She wrote, "Dear Father, I am not in need of rescue. I am home." She did not enclose the money draft. Instead, she enclosed a small, sun-faded photograph she had paid a traveling photographer to take. It showed the creek, the rocking chair, and the children, all of them, Dine and White, laughing together. She sealed the envelope and gave it to the stagecoach driver for the return journey. She was done running. That evening, Ashki came to her. He did not come to the tent. He came to the rocking chair. She was sitting there, her work done for the day, watching the water. He brought 2 horses, not her mule. "Saddle your horse," he said. It was not a request. "Where are we going?" she asked, rising. "You have seen the canyon," he said, "but you have not seen the world. Hastings says it is time." They rode for 2 days. He did not take her on the low paths. He took her high, up into the thin, clear air of the mesas. He showed her how to find the hidden springs, how to read the clouds, how to listen to the silence. On the 3rd morning, they stood on a high, wind-swept peak. The sun was just rising. The world was spread out below them, a vast, painted desert of red, blue, purple, and gold. Ashki pointed, his arm, now free of its bandage and scarred, a dark, strong line against the sky. There, he said, pointing east. Cisna Genie, the sacred mountain of the east. It is our beginning. He turned. And there, Tsudzil, the sacred mountain of the south. He pointed west to a dark blue peak on the horizon. Duko U Slid, where the sun sets. And finally, to the north, Debe Nitsa, the sacred mountain of the north. That is our boundary. He stood beside her, his presence a solid, warm thing in the cold morning air. This is our world, the Dine Bikea, the land between the four mountains. This is where we are safe. This is where the Blessing Way lives. He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. You have seen them. Now you will not be lost. I promised I would show you all the paths. And now, he said, a small, soft smile touching his lips, I have shown you the way home. From any direction. Nell looked out at the vast, terrifying, beautiful world. She was not lost. She was, for the first time in her life, perfectly, precisely, found. They rode back in a comfortable silence. When they returned, they began the work of building. The Community Water Trust needed a permanent office. Nell's clinic needed a real roof before winter. They stood on the bank, by her tent, drawing plans in the sand. We will build it here, Nell said, drawing a square. The clinic, a front room for examinations, and a back room where I can live. It needs a window, facing south. Good, Ashki said. He knelt beside her and drew another, larger square, connected to hers. And here, the office for the trust. We need a big table, for the maps, and for the meetings. And a porch, Nell said, connecting them. A porch with a roof, so people can wait in the shade. A man from the mercantile, who had been helping, cleared his throat. It looks like a house, Miss Hart, a large one, for two. Nell and Ashki looked at each other. They had not spoken of it. They had not used the words. They had no paper. They had no ring, no preacher, no ceremony of that kind. No, Ashki said, his voice simple, his gaze on Nell. It is not a house. It is a clinic and an office. We are partners in the work. The man, embarrassed, nodded and walked away. Nell looked at the drawing in the sand. A clinic and an office, joined by a porch, 2 separate rooms, connected, each with its own door, each with its own purpose, but sharing a roof. Not a prison, not a possession, a partnership. It will be a good building, she said, her voice soft. That night, the last of the harvest was in. The air was cool, scented with pine smoke from the hogans. The moon was a sliver, and the stars were a riot. They were at the rocking chair. Nell was sitting in it, her hands resting on the wooden arms. Ashki came and sat on the ground at her feet, his back against the chair, just as he had before. For a long time they just listened to the water. Hastine came to me today, Nell said, her fingers finding his hair, the thick, black strands. He brought me a gift. He is a good man, Ashki said, his voice a low rumble. He gave me a name. Ashki was still. He waited. He calls me Tuaisani, she who keeps the source clean. He said my name. Eleanor was too hard to say. Ashki's hand found hers. He lifted it from his hair, turned, and knelt before her, so their faces were level. He looked at her copper hair in the starlight, at her green eyes, at the faint scar on her wrist. He took her other hand. It is a good name, he said. His voice was thick. It is who you are. He leaned in, and he kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the canyon. It was not a kiss of fear, or of shared death. It was a kiss of life. It was slow, and deep, and sure. It was a kiss that held the long, slow days of work, the shared laughter, the ride to the mountains, the plans drawn in the sand. It was the kiss of a man who was not running, and a woman who was not hiding. He pulled back, just enough for their breath to mingle in the cold air. His forehead rested against hers. "Do you remember? In the canyon?" he whispered, his hands holding her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I was afraid. I said, if I went deeper, I would not find my way out." "I remember," she whispered, her own hands on his wrists, feeling the steady, strong pulse. "I was wrong," he said, his voice a raw, low thing. This is deeper than any canyon, and I do not want to find my way out. Stay with me, Eleanor, Tuaisani, stay with me. Deeper than the stone, deeper than the water." She did not need to answer with words. She kissed him, and it was an answer. It was a promise. It was the sound of the stream, the feel of the land, the pull of the stars, all centered in one perfect, unshakable place. The water flowed, its voice the oldest song. The stars wheeled overhead, reflected in the clear, clean, running stream. The land was quiet, at peace. On the bank, a man and a woman sat, small figures in a vast world, no longer fighting the land, or each other, or themselves, but a part of it. The harvest was in, and the season ahead promised to be a long and good one. Thank you so much for listening to our story. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts so we can all connect. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really loved it, please hit that hype button. It helps more than you know and allows these stories to be heard by so many more.